The 20-year-old me would have loved this obnoxiously loud groaning sound when I turn on the WRX, but the 38-year-old me is finding it rather obnoxious, annoying, and frankly immature. It has other faults. It doesn't look particularly attractive. However, Subaru has never really mastered design. The last WRX wasn't very pretty either, and although most of you prefer the bug-eye model, which was the first one that we had here in North America in the early 2000s, it was never a very attractive car. We always liked the WRX for its drivetrain, its driving performance, and the experience behind the wheel. Now for this new generation, well, Subaru tried to do something a bit different by adding body cladding around the fenders right here, very much like an SUV. We can't get away from it, can we? SUVs are everywhere. They're even taking over the good old WRX. I mean, leave this car alone. This is one of the last gems for automotive enthusiasts. However, I understand what Subaru is trying to do with this cladding. The WRX is a rally-inspired car. A lot of its owners will be driving this thing on gravel roads as if they were amateur rally drivers. So from what I was explained from one of Subaru's PR people is that this is to give it a rally look, but it also adds a bit of protection in case the rocks go flying in the fender flares. And when you think about it, it's actually quite clever. The rest of the styling, it just looks like a blob like all the new Subarus. However, I like what they've done with the hood scoop. That's a typical design ornament on the WRX to signify it has a turbocharged Boxster engine under the hood. It's well integrated into the hood itself, but I find the headlights to be a bit too tiny. The front end is too plastic extensive, and the rear, it's just god awful. It looks like a modified Honda Civic. It doesn't work. Of course, what you guys want to know is how the new WRX changes from a technical standpoint, and in that respect, you're not going to be disappointed. There's an all-new engine under the hood. It's still a Boxster flat 4, it's still turbocharged, but displacement goes from 2-liter to 2.4 liters. Remember the Subaru BRZ I reviewed on this channel a few weeks back? Well, this is essentially the same engine, but with a turbo slapped onto it. Actually, it's taken out of the Subaru Ascent midsize SUV. Now, the purpose of this augmented displacement, says Subaru, is to give the engine more low-end torque and to allow this engine to be less dependent on turbocharging. In other words, what Subaru wants to do is give you more engine in the throttle pedal and less boost. So there was a lot of work done to this engine to make the WRX faster, more powerful, and more enjoyable to drive, only to end up with 3 additional horsepower. That's right, this all-new engine, which has much more displacement, pumps out 271 horsepower and the same torque as before, 258 pound-feet. So what gives? Well, this engine differentiates itself from its predecessor in the details. Torque kicks in a lot lower in the rev band at 2,000 RPM, and Subaru says that it's a much more linear power delivery all the way to its 6,000 RPM red line. Sounds promising, but there's only one way to find out. It's to give this thing a proper hooning, which is exactly what I'm about to do. Well, it's not just the engine that's new in the new WRX, nor the styling. The entire car was overhauled for the 5th generation. This finally rests on Subaru's global architecture, the same platform it's been using for all its vehicles for the past 5 years or so. The WRX is the last car to come with this architecture. Now, Subaru is pretty direct about the future of this vehicle. This is probably the last gasoline-powered WRX that we're gonna have. Yes, it'll be here for a few more years, at least 5 or 6 years, but Subaru has already killed off the STI. So this is the most powerful sports car that Subaru currently sells. Mind you, it's still highly entertaining. While the styling is questionable, the car itself still has the fantastic qualities of its predecessor, which is to offer its owner decent performance at an attainable price, and more importantly, usable all year long. As you know, I live here in Canada in the province of Quebec. Over here, winters are very harsh. We have a lot of snow, it's very cold, and our roads are crap. we have the worst roads in North America because come springtime, the ground is thawing and it's just making a whole bunch of bumps and cracks and holes in the pavement. What this means is that what you're looking for from a daily driver is a vehicle that can go through all that and not break apart come summer. The WRX is fantastic for this. The suspension is nice and compliant. This thing, because it was created to be a amateur rally car, the suspension is nice and compliant. It can take road imperfections like a pro. You can go through a hole, through a pothole, over a bump with this thing, and it will just absorb it really well. And with the new platform, everything is a lot more buttoned down, a lot more mature and refined. And then of course there's Subaru's fantastic all-wheel drive system. It's symmetrical all-wheel drive system. This is a permanent system, meaning that it's always running on 4 wheels. So this is not a reactive system like some of the front bias systems we're seeing on the market. This is hands down still the best all-wheel drive system on the market, also because of its engine configuration. The flat 4 boxer engine is low to the ground. It allows the car to have a more planted center of gravity. All of this put together allow the WRX to be one hell of a handler on a twisty road. So about the new engine, well, here we go. We're going to try it out. What I love about the WRX is that there are no sport modes. It's always on. It's always on its high performance mode. There's only one button for traction control. You remove it by pressing it in one shot like this. You also activate track mode when you do this. Enter a corner very fast. The chassis is impeccable and that engine is good. Like in the BRZ, it's actually quite rev happy. I was not expecting that. It's nice and peppy, and boost comes in really at around 3,500 RPM and never stops. However, even though Subaru says that this engine is not as boost reliant as before, that's not really true. Nothing really happens under the turbocharging threshold. I'll give you an example. I'll put it in 4th gear. I'm in 4th gear at 65 kilometers an hour. The engine right now is spinning at 2,500 RPM. I floor it, nothing, 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 nothing. And here we go, finally going. So it takes a while. You gotta row that 6-speed manual gearbox, but it's a great gearbox. This is also new for the new model. The ratios are shorter. It's very crisp. It has a nice engaging mechanical feel to it, like in the BRZ. Oh yeah, this road. Oh, you can really catapult yourself outside of a corner. It is like a slingshot, and that has always been the WRX's tour de force. On a road like this, it is tremendous fun. Now about the turbo boost, I mean, this thing will boost just under 15 PSI, which is considerably low by today's standards. Modern turbocharged engines tend to boost a lot higher. Fun fact, the Mercedes AMG C43 with its electric turbocharger boosts at more than 50 PSI. But the fact that it's a 2.4 liter larger displacement allows it to have more grunt, more low-end grunt. And although this is still quite a peaky engine, you don't need to thrash it as much as the last car. Here we go, very, very good. I talked about the manual transmission. There's also another transmission available for this car, and that's a CVT. I know many of you don't agree with that decision from Subaru, but I've driven the last generation WRX with a CVT, and honestly, it wasn't that bad. It's also well mated to this kind of drivetrain because it allows the engine to be thrown high up in the rev range and extract all of the power from that turbo, and since it never shifts, it makes it a quicker car. But if you buy WRX, you want to have the manual transmission because you'll be a lot more in control of the car. You'll be connected with the drivetrain, and at the end of the day, that's what counts. A new platform means a new interior for the WRX, and that feels good because the last car, well, was starting to become a bit dated and was a bit flimsy inside. This one is considerably better, especially the build quality and the materials used. It's well assembled and rather impressive considering the price of this thing. You're going to pay about $33,000 for an entry-level WRX, and the top spec version will be just a hair over $40,000. That's a very decent price considering the amount of performance that you're getting, the all-wheel drive, the 4-door practicality, and the large trunk. Now the sports bucket seats, they look great, they're supportive. However, for a big guy like me, they feel a bit tight. I do wish that Subaru would offer a side bolster adjustment, that way you could adapt it better to larger frames. For some weird reason, I either always feel too far or too close from the steering wheel. Speaking of steering wheel, this one is fantastic. It has a good size, it's not too big, not too small, it has proper thickness. I love how my thumbs rest right here on each side. This gives me good control with the car, especially when I'm driving it fast and rowing the manual transmission. And the ergonomics in the WRX are fantastic. This has been a Subaru strong point for quite some time. All the buttons are well laid out, nothing is complicated, and everything simply works. Right here on the steering wheel, I have two little buttons that allow me to navigate the tiny menu here in the instrument cluster. I have my volume control buttons here on the left, very simple, very straightforward. These two arrows right here allow me to skip between songs in my playlist. I have my source button, I have my Bluetooth voice command button right here, and on the right I have my cruise control commands. And what I like about this model is that it's not equipped with Subaru's EyeSight driving aid technology. Some people like that stuff, but I feel that the WRX shouldn't have any of that. You buy this car because you want to drive it. You want to focus on the road, on the engine, on the transmission, and this layout, in my opinion, is perfect. Now, the WRX still has a standard analog setup here. This is a bit rudimentary in a world where everybody is heading towards fully digital clusters. However, again, it works. It gets the job done, and if this allowed Subaru to keep the price low, I'm totally okay with this. And finally, the infotainment system. This is also a great update for the WRX. It's Subaru's latest tablet Starlink infotainment system. It's a much larger layout, a bit like the first generation Teslas. It takes up pretty much the entire midsection of the dashboard. And you know what? It works well. Okay, there's a bit of lag when you're navigating between screens, but there are some pretty witty features in this vehicle. For instance, the navigation system. It's very rare that I use a navigation system from a car maker because they tend to all suck. I'll typically connect my phone with Android Auto and use Google Maps, but the Subaru system is rather precise. Okay, it lags a bit when I'm moving around in the map, but the level of detail with this map is actually quite impressive, and the precision when I enter an address is sometimes even better than Google Maps. That's impressive from a car maker. Now, most of the car's commands are integrated in the screen. Like, for instance, the climate control commands. I have to go in there if I want to turn on the fan or turn it off or put it in auto mode. However, I do have some physical keys on each side to adjust the temperature. This is neat because these are typically the buttons you're going to press the most often when playing with the climate control. So having these right here is quite handy. It's the same thing for the defroster functions. They're right here as physical buttons. You need these things very fast in the morning if it's cold. You can turn on the rear defroster, defrost your mirrors very quickly without having to fiddle with the very laggy screen. And it's the same for volume knobs, tuning knobs. They're physical buttons. This is something that the entire industry needs to understand, is that touch operated controls for audio systems never work. This is brilliant, very simple, very well laid out. It's win-win. And finally, storage is ample in the WRX. I have a nice compartment right here. It's not too deep, but enough to throw a bit of gear. My two cup holders, a tiny little compartment here that I have no idea what it does, but at least there's a big tray right here where I can rest my phone, put a lot of junk. This is handy. I have an auxiliary audio jack. That's cool. 2 USB ports, and a 12-volt power outlet. So in terms of connections, I am well served. The 2022 Subaru WRX is as ugly as ever, and its new 2.4-liter engine isn't really more powerful. But you know what? The end product is still fantastic. As a matter of fact, this is probably the most capable WRX ever built. The price is right, the car handles fantastically well, and it has plenty of turbo punch. Add to that 4-seat practicality and a decent trunk, and it's still one of the best daily drivers currently on sale. Hurry up and get one, because chances are this too will one day become an electric SUV.